The bowl with one spoon, Sitting Bull, and the public interest versus the possessive individualism of Custer and AIG.
Of course, these volumes are not specialty monographs like we do in our PhD thesis where we write on very specified narrow areas. In these two volumes, I kind of gave myself permission to look very broadly at things and try to make the connections and develop a global perspective, interpretation. If we're going to live in a global society, we need to think of our history in a way that conform to it with this. So transcending boundaries, bridging barriers, that's been my interest and my motivation. Let's do a little bit of more local analysis or more local reflection on history, particularly on the period when Sitting Bull came into the Cypress Hills. And this part of the world that we now call Alberta, of course Alberta didn't exist before 1905, it's one of the times when this part of the world was really in a global spotlight. Sitting Bull, as we'll see, was such a controversial figure. And this question of how to treat indigenous peoples in law, I mean, this was a topic for high-level negotiations between Great Britain and the United States. The near obliteration of Custer's forces in 1876 at the Battle of Little Bighorn by Sioux, Cheyenne, and Northern Arapaho warriors is an episode in U.S. history laden with an especially heavy baggage of symbolic meanings. In the aftermath of their defeat of General George Custer's 7th Cavalry Unit, the victorious Aboriginal forces of Sitting Bull sought permanent refuge in Canada's Northwest Territories. So in 1876, 1870s, right up till 1905, this was the Northwest Territories. We're in part of the Northwest Territories right now. About 4,000 Sioux set up camp amid the forested slopes of the prairie oasis of Cypress Hills, just north of the international boundary running along the 49th parallel. The presence of Sitting Bull and his people in the federal territory of the Dominion of Canada created a major diplomatic controversy in relationships between Great Britain and the United States. In those days, the British Imperial government retained constitutional responsibility for Canada's international relations. Sitting Bull's quest for a permanent sanctuary in Canada for himself and his diverse band of followers sparked a major debate among officials seeking to clarify the precise legal status of Indian refugees from the U.S. Indian Wars. As military allies of the Crown in the War of 1812, the Sioux had particularly strong claims that they were entitled to the protection of the British Imperial government from their enemies in the United States. Some of the police and military officials responsible for overseeing Sitting Bull's band in the Cypress Hills clearly sympathized with the plight of its members. One of them, Colonel James McLeod, whose name is of course entrenched in the name of Fort McLeod and has a big history around here, Colonel James McLeod reported, "I think the principal cause of the difficulties which are continually embroiling the American government in troubles with the Indians is the manner in which they are treated by swarms of adventurers who have scattered themselves all over the Indian country in search of minerals before any treaty is made giving up the title. These men always look upon the Indians as their natural enemies, and it's their rule to shoot them if they approach after being warned off." In recounting his own dilemma, Sitting Bull explained to Colonel McLeod, "I tell you the truth. I've done nothing bad. The Americans tried to get our country from us. They knew the gold was there. I did not give them my land, no more than you would have given it. My people suffer from the Americans. I want to live in this country and be strong and well and happy. The Americans kill 10 or 20 of my children every day for nothing. I'd like to see my children alive. Soon you will see more of our tribe crossing the line. After elaborate and prolonged negotiations between the United States and Canada's imperial guardians in Great Britain, Sitting Bull and his followers were denied the sanctuary they sought in the territory of the Blackfoot, the Cree, and the Great White Mother. In 1881, Sitting Bull and his dwindling band were marched to the international border and delivered to the custody of U.S. officers. Unlike in the era of the American Revolution and the War of 1812, Crown officials had determined that it was no longer expedient to encourage Indigenous peoples either to oppose the expansion of the United States or to seek protection in Canada from the hostility of U.S. prospectors, settlers, and military forces. As David Mills, Canada's Minister of the Interior, wrote of the victors of the Battle of Little Bighorn on their entry into Canada's federal territories, it's desirable that as wards of the United States, they should return to that country upon the government of which morally devolves the burden and the responsibility of their civilization. After being returned to the United States, Sitting Bull embarked on his short career in show business. His transition from the rigors of real frontier warfare to play acting of feigned warfare took place even as Geronimo and his small band of Shakura resistors continued to elude the Mexican and U.S. authorities, the vigilantes, and the Tucson rings paid mercenaries. Along with American Horse, Rocky Bear, Flies Alone, Long Wolf, and several other Indian war veterans, Sitting Bull attracted huge business for Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West extravaganza. Their employment as actors portraying romanticized caricatures of themselves as part of a dramatic tradition reaching back long before George Catlin's traveling troupe of performing Indians, and pointing towards the days when cinematic westerns would help globalize the influence of Hollywood's empire of fantasy. Sitting Bull, however, soon tired of this life on display. He returned one last time to his own people to help them resist a major federal effort to diminish still further the extent of unceded Sioux lands in the Dakota and Nebraska areas. So these two volumes together constitute this series, The Bowl with One Spoon. The Bowl with One Spoon is a representation that appeared on wampum belts. Wampum belts used throughout the East, shelled belts signifying agreements between peoples. So Indigenous peoples in their treaties among themselves would signify the terms of different agreements with wampums. The pictographs, the representations in these wampums, they were kind of like a common language, and one of the symbols is the bowl with one spoon, which means shared hunting territory. This valley here, your people and my people, we can share hunting in this area. So I've tried to build on this idea of the bowl with one spoon throughout these volumes, and I found myself going into that idea with respect to the financial debacle of 2008-2009. At one point, it occurred to me as I was studying treaties, studying warfare, Indian wars, things like the Trail of Tears, where Cherokee people were marched out of what became Georgia at the end of guns, that all of this was a part of capitalism, the history of capitalism, that this was part of a process of transforming the Western Hemisphere, the forests, the lands, the gold, the uranium, hydroelectricity, into commodity, into things that could be bought and sold. And so the bowl with one spoon seemed to me to be a sort of symbol of another approach of sharing, where you don't put so much emphasis on the individual ownership, where you look at things more collectively. So here's just a short passage, which happens to be the last paragraph of the 15th chapter. There are 15 chapters in Earth into Property. There's also an epilogue, so it's not completely the end of the narrative. But here I'm finishing the chapter where I look at from General Motors to AIG to the bowl with one spoon. I did a case study on the nationalization of General Motors, the central importance of this insurance company, AIG, which was right at the center of the financial debacle. And here's how I end it. The image of the bowl with one spoon serves as a symbol of the public interest that emerges from the Indian country of Canada. In Canada, the Anglo-American tradition of making treaties with Indigenous peoples has never been preempted. The Aboriginal provisions of the Royal Proclamation are being renewed in British Columbia and elsewhere in treaty negotiations with First Nations that continue until this day. Picture the reality that treaties are still being made in British Columbia. Do you see anything like that happening in California? No, you don't. The higher ideals of this tradition of intercultural diplomacy have not always been well understood or respected. Nevertheless, this continuing heritage offers the world a North American example of an approach to human interaction that eschews the extremes of conquest and embraces instead a broader vision of the public interest and the public good. So this concept of the bowl with one spoon, the shared hunting territory, why not expand this into concepts of the public interest, the common good? Things like healthcare, universal healthcare, public broadcasting, public education. We can do things collectively